So let's roll into it, bud. So how about you introduce yourself to the folks at home, the roughly 30 to 40 folks at home, and tell us a little bit about what we'll be talking about tonight.
Well, hey everyone. I hope everyone's having a great evening. My online moniker is Dangerous Days. I am currently a student of psychology over at Hunter College with intent to pursue a master's in mental health counseling, hopefully to become a licensed clinician social worker, which is just a fancy title for a psychotherapist. Um,
Based.
Definitely made this a career path where I want to work with people who are some would say on the edge, ready to take the long walk, and I want to help them walk it back.
Interesting. So you would actually view. I think part of the reason why I was reticent to have this conversation wasn't because I'm not interested in the subject matter, or because I don't feel like I have experience, or that I don't feel like you have relevant experience. But I know that some people can get really uncomfortable really fast when you talk about like the deep dark shit and kind of the paths that we're down, that lead you up to that moment of potentially taking your own life or disengaging from society or whatever. But what you said that you had some insights into nihilism in general and depression, and yeah, if you want to get into it, I'd be happy to listen and poke around.
Yeah, so this is there. So there is no one through line to go. It's kind of like a web where everything is somewhat connected to each other, and you have to pull on each strand to see what else it tugs on. So the best way to start is with depression. What is depression? Most people understand it as the big sad. When you're just sad, you're down in dumps, you don't want to do anything, you have no energy, you have no just you're experiencing this intense dysphoria. Everything sucks. That is one way of it expressing itself. Depression is a incredibly wide-ranging spectrum. Um, where some people would experience minor depression, others have major episodes. Some people are seasonal affective, and it also depends on the culture. The depression we understand is actually a very Western depression. You know, the stereotypical person laying in bed doesn't want to get up. That's a very American and Western European way of expressing it. Asian forms of depression manifest itself in physical psychosomatic pain,
Yeah,
where a
so
person.
so that
uh,
that's already interesting. I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just kind of wanted to share, so it's an interplay. The I don't know if I've ever been depressed. I think I've been anxious before, and I don't think I've ever had the luxury of staying in bed. And I kind of like, just for like economic reasons. And so I was also raised in a culture like my ethnicity is Irish, where it's like, oh, life sucks, boo hoo, you fucking pussy. Like that's life. Get the fuck up and get going. And so with that kind of mentality, again, like I don't know if I've had symptoms, or even if like is Irish stoicism a solution to depression? Like I don't know.
some people would say it is.
Yeah.
Um, there.
No, but you were
So
describing Asian depression as well as a different
yeah,
form.
yeah. Well, it varies widely. And each culture deals with depression in its own way. Um, and in a sense, depression also is interesting in how it starts. There's a lot of theories as to like what actually causes depression. Some people believe that it is a vulnerability to stressors that makes a person depressed. For example, if a person is incapable of dealing with adversity before them, if a person is incapable of adapting to grief around them, that causes depression. Others believe that there is some form of a biological function to it, though how much of that is true is dubious at best. Um,
If
and
I could ask right there, so a lot of people talk about biological depression. And for me, I would say part of the way that I avoided depression for a really long time was always having a project, always having something engaged in. So when I was a teenager, obviously that project was girls and drugs. And then when I was in the Marine Corps, it was surviving the Marine Corps. And then when I was out of the Marine Corps, I thought about taking my own life because all I saw ahead of me was like a big backslide into shit I didn't want to do. And I also felt like I'd seen and done a lot of like really horrific shit. So I kind of was like, like, there's not a big difference being alive versus being dead. And I was very much a nihilist hedonist at the time. And that kind of made it worse. But then what I've kind of realized is I'm on medication right now for anxiety, not for depression. And basically, what I would say is I needed the kick. I needed the help because I can get wrapped up in a big project, but if I'm down with boring shit, I don't want to be here. Like it's boring. I don't want to do stupid shit. Um, so I kind of get if you don't have like a driving purpose in your life, why you would have anxiety or depression. But then I think that's your body trying to tell you to change something. And then the only other thing that I would say is with biological depression, the reason why that makes sense to me is because I know that some people just feel sad, and I don't know if I've ever really felt sad. Maybe it's again I'm Irish, so like I have two ways of feeling. It's like angry and apathetic. Like, those are my two. Those are
I
my two
mean,
emotional states.
that yeah, no, I could definitely see that. As far as see the reason why I doubt the biological depression thing is because last month I'm sure you've heard it that there was, or maybe a month and a half ago, there was a study that was performed, a meta-analysis, I believe. I could be misremembering it, but where depression was looked at specifically through chemical imbalances, specifically serotonin, where serotonin is the happiness drug that floats in our brain. It is the drug that makes us happy, that kind of allows us to be able to feel pleasure from activities. That's why when we take SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, it is specifically supposed to stop the natural drains for serotonin. That it increases the volume within our brains, and that it helps us function day to day.
Yeah,
And
yeah, and but then that's kind of the question or the implied question for me in the political sphere is like it feels like our lives are kind of built not to naturally give us a lot of serotonin or the happiness drug. Because like for instance, I spent my entire day in the yard today, or at least I spent 3 hours in it. What a pain in the ass it was. But I always get like a kick at the end of it when I'm done. And I have to assume that that is from, not only setting out a task and accomplishing it, but it also being complex and kind of taxing. And then that also being in line with what my ancestors did, which is if they were farmers or warriors or whatever, then they took on shitty things during the day. They could see some measurable improvement in work. And then when they were done for the day, they were able to wipe the sweat from their brow and kind of, go collapse into a bed and pass out. Whereas nowadays, particularly with like computers, emails, tech jobs, bureaucracy, administration, all that kind of stuff, you don't seem to get one, you're dealing with like an ocean of work to be done. And then two, you don't necessarily get to see your impact, particularly in the corporate world. So, especially if you're like a cog in a machine. So, how much of it do you think is like our brain and bio wiring doesn't match the world we're surrounded by?
so, in a sense, I can definitely see that, and I could agree with that. In fact, one of the key aspects to depression is the outlook on a person's individual future, the perception of future. So, a person who's really depressed has a grossly distorted view of time, of present, of past, and the future in general, and of self. So, a person who is severely depressed, like, they can't picture themselves not being depressed. So, similarly, when a person is doing physical work, they can picture what the work can look like in a week or a month or even a year from where they are because they could see the progress little by little daily. In a office environment where you just are clicking on a bunch of documents, typing in, filling in, triplicating, you don't see progress. You receive a biweekly paycheck, and then you go home, you crack a beer open, you watch Top Gear, then you pass out on the couch and repeat all over again next morning.
Right. Yeah, and
That,
sorry, go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say that in a sense could leave a person thinking that they're quite literally trapped, that they are waking up and every day is just like yesterday.
Yeah. The just to share, like not that it necessarily changes the conversation much, but one of the things that I dealt with, particularly in law enforcement and particularly after the Marine Corps, was I didn't see a future. Like my sense of threat and my sense of like imminent threat and imminent death was so high that I basically was like, well, I'm just trying to make it till tomorrow. And now that I've been out of the service for a couple of years, I can kind of start to see the future a little bit, and I can kind of like bob my head above the waves and kind of see some stuff that might be coming up that would be worth being a part of. But I think there's a defense mechanism, particularly for people who go through like trauma, where they don't want to picture the future because to picture the future would give them hope that there is a future. Whereas when you're in like, I don't know, violent circumstances, you kind of just want to deal with the moment. You don't even want to deal with the future.
No, that could definitely be true. Um, I could imagine when a person is in a high stress, high intensity situation, they're not necessarily thinking long term because that is uh, counterproductive to their situation currently. They're definitely thinking of how do I utilize the available resources I currently have to make it out of the situation as is now. And that would be a tricky thing where you're in the foxhole and then the guy next to you is thinking like, what do you think you'll be doing in the next 3 years?
Yeah, and it's like,
No,
motherfucker, I'm just trying to live.
yeah, like I don't want to catch lit to the head, so let's focus on the
Let's
important thing
focus
right
on
now.
that. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, well,
Whereas
that does seem different than depression though, because with depression, like you said, it's like they're envisioning a terrible or mundane future without hope of reprieve.
exactly. And that's not it's not always the case, but it's definitely a large indicator. And this is where nihilism, I believe, comes into play here.
Okay.
Now, nihilism, I believe, has been misinterpreted. Nihilism is the thing to avoid. It is not the thing to embrace. But in order to avoid it, you got to understand what it actually is.
Mm.
So, depending on what type of psychological philosophy angle you approach it at, there is a group of existential thought that says that people, until they experience an existential crisis, they feel the dread and the terror of their own reality enshroud them, they are living life in bad faith.
Oof.
That is a terrible way of approaching it because that's basically saying the farmer who's happy toiling his field, raising his family, and dying a happy man has lived his entire life in bad faith and he needs to do a redo. That is no. That's a bunch of French philosophers who are blowing themselves.
Wait, so
However,
I'm not better than other people because I've experienced existential dread?
it gives you perspective. It
Right.
definitely gives you perspective.
Well, can we also blame the Greeks a little bit with what is it? It's like Socrates. It's like the unconsidered life is not worth living or something like that. Like there were some Greek dudes blowing themselves too for how fucking smart they were with their fucking stoicism and literally, I hate to say it, but my dad's a big Epictetus fan. I think these people thought that they had outwitted death through thinking, and you know, I think that's hubris.
It definitely, I mean, it definitely sounds like it. I mean, we could blame the ancient Greeks for a lot of things. Um, But nihilism, intense nihilism, is the belief that there is no meaning.
Hmm.
Now, it rarely comes out of thin air. Usually, when we think of nihilist, we think of like the punk rocker, goth emo kid who's going through the phase, who thinks like every word that came out of Nietzsche's mouth is the most profound thing that ever existed and will ever exist.
Right.
Where they don't realize that Nietzsche himself he went insane shortly before his death and died a broken, sad man.
Yeah,
And
he was also an
arguably,
anti. Yeah, he was also like an anti-nihilist. Like he saw the death of religion as a terrible thing, not something to be celebrated. Like he saw
yeah,
the consequences of disbelief being like materialist hedonism that solely corrupts and destroys the human soul, and he was trying to get a alternative vision of the future of mankind to survive the death of God. And yeah, so,
yeah,
so it's not
exactly.
something to be celebrated.
No, absolutely not. Every single person who has those like "God is dead and we killed him" posters on their wall is literally is antithetical to what Nietzsche was trying to fight tooth and nail
Yeah,
against.
yeah, he was trying to warn you. He wasn't trying to celebrate it.
Exactly. And within this nihilism, this idea that everything is meaningless, there is no purpose, no gods, no masters, this thing, it does lead a person to essentially lose their footing.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm not gonna say that the footing has to be religious. It has to be conservative. It doesn't have to be a traditional thing. No, footing, what I believe is that each person has to have some sort of structure that they make for themselves, something to help them. For some people, again, that's religion. Some people find serenity and happiness and structure in their faith. They go to temple or they go to church and they pray, they make their donations, they practice the rituals, and that gives them the meaning that they need to move from day to day.
Mhm.
Other
Yeah,
people could make it their community.
well, in the one thing, like, so for instance, like if there's, I even see some people being existential in the chat. If we have any nihilists in the chat, I would at least encourage you to move to absurdism, which is like that would be like level zero where I would want you to be, where you can be like a cosmic nihilist and be like, I don't think the universe has any memory, and I don't think our lives are ultimately meaningful, or they don't have like a meaningful impact, blah blah blah. But absurdism basically says, well, fuck it, we're gonna enjoy and create our own meaning by participating in life with a certain joie de vivre, like actually enjoying existence for the roller coaster that it is. That would be the bare minimum of what I would want somebody to move to if they were actually dealing with like nihilist or depressive impulses. And then what I would say helped me kind of start building out my own framework was the fact that like I I used to conceptualize myself as like this like amorphous like thought, like this ethereal soul that was separate from the body. But then what I realized was I don't know about the ethereal soul, but I do know that I'm a human, and I'm a human right now, and that I am designed to function in a certain way, which involves eating, shitting, sleeping, fucking, fighting, gathering resources, building things, letting them just be destroyed. And so instead of having my head trapped up in the clouds, I need to focus on being the best human being that I possibly can. And then I started answering my own philosophical questions from there.
Yeah, most definitely, and that is a actually a very healthy way of approaching things like depression and anxiety.
Mm-hmm.
The it's exactly why I dislike a certain strand of leftist thought, where it is the idea that nihilism rules the day, that there is no meaning, that if it doesn't work, throw it out, and this arbitrary structure. The
Mm-hmm.
problem is our lives are limited. Like this is what we got. This is our chance. And depending on what you believe in terms of afterlife, at the end of the day, We're in the here and now. This is your body. This
Hmm.
is exactly what we're doing. If you experience a chronic injury, that is a limb that is not going to all of a sudden work the next day because, well, this injury has no meaning to me. No,
Yeah.
congratulations. That is reality hitting you in the face with a shovel, telling you there are consequences to certain actions.
Oh, I think one of the ones that I loved most, I think it was like Evola or something like that, or another philosopher who basically believed that like you could harness the power of the gods by harnessing your own will inside your own body, and as a result, like things couldn't hurt you. And so, because like within your own mind, you've created yourself as a god, and you can kind of like outthink everything. And he used to go out for walks in World War I during artillery strikes, and then he got hit by a fucking artillery shell.
Yeah, and
And he
depending on
got
how you look at
shrapnel,
it,
and he was fucking paralyzed. And it's like,
you
bro,
got
you're not outthinking reality, you dumb fuck.
no, because reality doesn't give a damn. That's the
Yeah.
problem. Like, a person can't outsmart reality, and that's exactly why nihilism kind of falls flat on its face to a certain point. Everything could lack inherent meaning, but that doesn't mean that it's void of consequence.
Hmm.
Like, depending on which direction the wind was blowing, how gassy the artilleryman was feeling, and where exactly which street you decided to take a stroll on, maybe the shell could have missed you entirely, or maybe it could have literally turned you into a pile of gore. No one really knows.
Right.
The important thing to approach it is to acknowledge at least that perhaps we don't know why or how reality started. Hell, like I'm not saying I could even argue that yeah, maybe reality, maybe our existence doesn't have any inherent meaning, but that doesn't mean we can't grant it such a meaning. And
Well,
a part of me,
hmm
oh, go ahead.
well, yeah. Sorry to cut you off, but the reason why I'm jumping ahead a little bit is because I think that you have to look at the outcomes for individuals' lives who make different choices on how to interact with reality. So if you look at the outcomes, which I'm hoping you can speak to, for nihilism or hedonism or solipsism or basically like religiosity or spiritualism or anything like that. I think you can look at actual outcomes like length of life, perceived sense of purpose, daily meaning, daily happiness, daily contentment, daily purpose. All the things that human beings believe are important to some degree or to another. And once you start looking at who has the good things and who is suffering, I think you can start making some inferences about how to live your life. And at least that's how I kind of treated it, because when I was like a nihilist hedonist, it's because I was so fucking smart. Everybody else is an idiot. I'm going to go, bang as many people as I can and do as many drugs as I can. And then I realized I was fucking miserable. And I was like, oh, well, everybody who acts like me is miserable. Maybe I'm wrong. And that was kind of like the thread that I started yanking on.
Yeah. See, you are definitely correct. The what I believe is the biggest harm that a person could experience is this exact uh the lack of structure, the lack of something meaningful to hold on to. And this is what I believe follows up into my next point. It is something known as terror management theory. And this is a relatively recent theory that was crafted by some social and evolutionary psychologists, like like second half of the 20th century recent. And it is the belief that we as people do a lot of the things we do is because um, subconsciously we are painfully aware of our own mortality. We're
Yep.
painfully aware of the fact that we are highly limited in what we in the time we have, and that we do all the things that we do to distract us.
Yeah.
In a way, hedonism might be the ultimate distraction from it, doing everything desperate to experience the bodily pleasure of now so as to not be faced with the reality that, well, yeah, every single person here elsewhere in the world is going to kick the bucket one point or another.
Hmm.
To some people, that's a terrifying prospect.
It is
That
terrifying.
it's incredibly terrifying. The fact that we're experiencing reality now, and then at a certain point we won't.
Yeah, and I've come up with a billion ways to cope, but I'm trying not to, give myself an existential panic attack during this conversation. Some
Exactly.
some some of them are drugs, some of them are coping, some of them is your kids, some of them are family, some of them all that kind of stuff. And I think I've heard it talked about as like death avoidance psychology. Like you're if you're playing video games, it's because you don't want to think about the fact that you're dying. If you're fucking somebody, it's because you don't want to think about the fact that you're dying. If you're having kids, it's because you want to build a legacy that'll outlive you because you're afraid of dying. If you're building an empire, it's because it's because you're afraid of dying. And like so it's actually really funny knowing that this is kind of where we get back into absurdism, that like every mortal creation will be ultimately destroyed. But then that also kind of begs the question, like, okay, so everything's going to be destroyed. So what do you want to create? And as a creator, or religion asks you to contemplate the role of a creator. So if you could emulate that, are you emulating God? Or are you emulating nothing? It's interesting.
It is interesting, and it's a question that, well, as you could clearly see, thousands of philosophers, politicians, thinkers, psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors, amateur people for hundreds of years have like asked this exact question. What is the meaning? Because like I presented to you, this subconscious existential dread, this terror that is just behind but close enough to where it could brush up against anybody and they'll feel it. So then people think, well, I'm gonna die, so what's the point? They start thinking, so what's the point? Nothing has meaning. We're all gonna be dirt in the ground regardless. And then everyone starts embracing this nihilistic mindset, and everyone starts letting go of structures. No one can see their own future. No one can make any progress toward any future. And that's where the depression sets in.
This feels very luxurious, though. Like that's the other thing that I noticed is depression. Like, I think depression, anxiety, and suicide are literally lower in like poorer people because they're just scrambling to survive. like, and that's like one of the great ironies of depression is it's almost like a luxury to be depressed because you don't have to worry about your survival, whereas most of human history was concerned with survival.
Yeah, that is very true. But then we get into your favorite psychological topic, Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Yeah.
Everyone's desperately scrambling for the first step to have security of shelter, of food, water, warmth, these things. You're right, to a degree, depression is a bit more of a luxury, but it is still a painful process nonetheless. Because
Yeah.
a person then proceeds to the next step of the hierarchy, and they're experiencing this violent depression, and it starts bearing down on them.
Yeah.
And like I remember watching a clip of Jordan Peterson back before he decided to go off the deep end, and he was doing a speech at a college somewhere, and he was asked the question, what he believed was worse between either depression or physical injury, or I think it was like depression or something else. I can't quite remember. And he said, "Oh, instantly, depression is worse because when you're injured in some other form, it can be addressed. You can take painkillers. If you're experiencing some form of schizophrenia, you could take antipsychotics. If you're experiencing the flu, you could take some Dayquil. When you're depressed, you're depressed. You can't escape your own brain no matter how hard you try. You can't unthink yourself of the hole you found yourself in.
Yeah, and if I could if I could say something to the audience, like I was anti pills for a really long time, and still am to some degree. And I viewed getting on pills as like a synthetic way to deal with your problems. But I also was so torn apart by not having anything, having no relief, no respite, no nothing, no room to breathe, that eventually that I just did it out of frustration. And I gotta say, it's given me room to breathe and explore, and I'm still the same person. Like I'm still the same human being. I'm still the same. I got the same problem, same name, same address, same social security number, same all that kind of stuff. But so basically, I do like duloxetine, which is a very common anti-nerve pain and anti-anxiety drug, and then I also do hydroxyzine, which is actually it's a it's like a Benadryl, but it has like the side effect of just kind of like calming down your entire body. And so for me, this kind of gave me the space to explore my own fucked upness. So, like I'm pretty fucking anti-pill, but if you need help, just fucking get it, bud, because
Yeah,
suffering is fucking horrible, especially for years.
absolutely. Absolutely. The best way to look at it, like during the opioid epidemic, a lot of people have, rightfully, I could say, approached pills with a very negative eyes. Like, well, I'm being given this thing that will turn me eventually into a heroin junkie. And I could definitely understand the reticence some people approach it with. However, the a perspective I was shown by a good friend is to approach these things like a tool in a toolbox. Obviously, they're not going to be the tool for everything. They're not going to be a cure all. But if you have a problem and you need something, then yeah, like it could definitely help you function while you pursue a better long term solution. Um,
Yeah.
a person got a busted leg. Cool, here's some morphine. The answer isn't to continually take morphine. The answer is let's get you to a hospital and fix the busted leg.
Well, so I actually had a question. Are there any for me, we're in the era of do you have a study, statistics, statistics, statistics. And so my question is kind of like, are there any statistics for like outcome by philosophy? Because like I would borderline see if like Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Hinduism and Buddhism and whatever, like having some kind of like religious structure, like if it had better life term or lifelong outcomes versus like hedonist nihilism, I think that would be a fun thing to kind of like shove in the nihilist face. Is like, hey, bitch, like by every conceivable metric, you are living a worse life while thinking that you're better than everybody. So who's the fucking idiot?
Oh, it depends because a lot of people, well, when it comes to psychology, there is the replication crisis. It is not a guarantee that any psychological study I could present will be one that could hold up to replication and therefore actual proper scientific rigor.
Right.
The best that can be shown would be like a number of statistics.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that'll take some digging to properly parse out because usually there is no discussion of cure when it comes to mental injury, mental disorder, mental illness, because it's not it's not exactly as simple as fixing a physical injury.
Of course. Well, I'm
But in
I'm
a
gonna sorry. I'm just gonna post this in chat. It's fucking hysterical. It's an article by Forbes that says religion is good for your health.
I
And
mean,
for longevity, stress, anxiety, and health outcomes and psychological outcomes, even during terminal illness, it's like it's all positives. Now, of course, it's like it's all a big fucking cope. Like I get it, but I'm just saying, like you're gonna live longer, you'll be happier, you'll be more rooted, you'll have better community, all that kind of stuff. It's like I'm not saying that you have to like be Christian or be like literalist, but I'm just saying like having a structure is clearly health wise preferred to not having any structure.
No, you're definitely right in that regard. Definitely right. And that's exactly what I also advocate for a person to have some type of structure. It doesn't have to be religious. It doesn't have to be political. It doesn't have to be anything, but it has to be in a healthy manner. Um, Most people kind of need to do something. That's why a lot of communities do organize around their local church because that's where you see everyone. That's where you socialize. That's where all of you have this large umbrella that you gather under and that you're able to find the meaning that you need to continue day by day by day.
Hmm. Ye-
Um, yes.
Well, yeah. So I was just gonna say the but Bud 123 kind of says, I don't, God is not real. I have no faith. So for me, at this point in my life, like I don't know if I believe in an afterlife. There could be an afterlife. I met a guy who died who said that he experienced something similar to an afterlife. So that I think there's a possibility. I also think it could just be like dreamless sleep for a few billion years. And also, if you're talking about like eternity, eternity is really interesting. Eternity is so big that you can't conceptualize it, and we live in a universe that's so big that you can't conceptualize it. So Nietzsche actually has this like concept of like eternal recurrence, like
Hmm.
live your life as if you were going to have to repeat it a billion times. And I don't think that he actually literally believed that you were going to repeat your life a billion times. I think he was trying to come up with a way for people to look at the way that they analyzed their existence and to maximize the positives that they could glean from it. I think that's an okay way to look at it. But all of this is my point is like you could believe that the universe was created by a foundational force that we don't understand that brings some level of order to the universe, and you could call that God. It doesn't and then that God doesn't have to be conscious and doesn't have to care about you to still be a foundational and ordered force. And then looking at life, you can derive rules and laws and outcomes by observing human behavior, deciding what's good and bad, and then erring towards the good and trying to minimize the bad. And then I think you can also just look at like what's the perfect person or what's the ideal person when they're 10 years old, 20 years old, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, 60, 70, 80. What are the people that we valorize when they face death and old age? What are the people that we valorize in our society, and how can I best be like those people? And I think if you start asking those questions, it gives you a compass to start navigating your own life. And that's a lot better than just kind of sitting in an apartment and being like, well, it's all meaningless anyways, so I'm going to go try to finger fuck somebody and smoke a bunch of pot. Like I think the former is way better than the latter.
Yeah, and I could definitely see that. However, I believe that if a person is going to take the example of another person, that at least they try to take the parts and personalize it to themselves. Like just because Theodore Roosevelt was an asthmatic who then led the Rough Riders in the Cuba in a war in Cuba and was able to kick ass and become police commissioner in New York City. Like, sure, he lived a full life, but that doesn't mean you have to do those exact same things. You don't provoke a war in the Caribbean, then lead a bunch of cavaliers through the hills of
Yeah.
Cuba.
If you don't invade Cuba, you're a fucking pussy.
Exactly, fucking based.
No. And yeah, and like you have
But
to realize your own limitations too. Like I'm pretty sure that motherfucker like went to Harvard and had rich friends. Like I know he was like sickly and shit, and he like overcame a lot of bullshit, but I think he was pretty well connected. So I think the other part of it is like you have to look at your limits. Who do you know? What money do you have? What intelligence and talents do you have? What do you have to offer the world? And then it becomes like a very Jordan Peterson individualized analysis, which I'm perfectly fine with. And honestly, like I kind of wish I wish the fucking leftoids online didn't have such a fucking poo poo about fucking Jordan Peterson, particularly with the self help stuff and the men self help stuff, because I do think it fucking orients people properly.
it definitely helps a person begin their first steps. Now,
Yeah.
when discussing something like overcoming terror and breaking nihilism and actually finding out who you are, core person, and finding the meaning that you need to go day to day, that is a highly individual journey. Some
Right.
people relinquish that individuality and they decide that their purpose in life is the collective. If you want to do that and you're approaching in a healthy way and not flying Japanese fighter planes into the sides of American destroyers, sure, have a great time. Uh, but you have to be able to find a healthy balance. Like, for example, this dichotomy between the individual and the collective. It's why I appreciate your approach to it, the community approach to it, because no man is an island entirely of themselves. We know that. Like, we're all people. We live in our neighborhoods. We see our neighbors. Like, you can't just pretend, well, everything that happens with them completely doesn't affect me, so fuck them. I'm gonna go finger fuck this person, do a bunch of pot.
Right.
You're not going to escape the consequences of your neighborhood. Now, if you want to say something like, oh, sure, neighbor, I'll help you dig this ditch after I come back out from an hour because I'm gonna go finger fuck somebody and then smoke a bunch of pot. You could do both. Just make sure you can strike the proper balance to do both. Make sure you can figure out what value, like what are the things that you value and the things that grant you meaning. The
Yeah.
problem, yeah, the
Mhm.
problem is going all in, like fuck it, all in 22
Well,
red.
this is where I think the fascists have something correct, and they talk about it. So communitarianism instead of collectivism or individualism. So they like fascists believe in political corporatism. It's where you believe in the nation state as like a body, and they also believe in communitarianism instead of individualism or collectivism. So collectivism, you have to subdue yourself to the collective. There's no other alternative. Fuck you. You know, you have to be a part of the collective and you have to subsume your individuality to it. Individualism says fuck the collective. Nobody can impose their rights or responsibilities onto you if you don't want them to. Whereas communitarianism would say that there's a balance between these two things and that it's actually a complex interplay that happens every single day for every single person between who you are as an individual and what you want to achieve and your responsibilities and duties to the collective. And it's actually up to individuals and up to the collective to negotiate what those things are at any point in history. And I know that's like a complex concept for people to be like, well, fuck, how do I negotiate my individualism versus the fucking collective while still taking on collective responsibility? But I think if you're willing to think about those things like intelligently and coherently for a little bit, you actually come up with a lot more coherent and cool worldview than either raw individualism or raw collectivism. And I'm kind of hoping to popularize it a little bit because I love it as an idea.
Yeah, as an idea, it definitely does work because it does grant it brings with it an inherent sense of meaning to the immediate area you're in. It does grant a sense of pride of your efforts. You can see progress being made, but at the same time, it is not like you carry the weight of the entire nation on your shoulders. And you
Right.
brought something else that interesting that was up, and that I do I wanna touch on.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a an article I read a while ago that a study found that comparing people who live in more liberal nations, which we would commonly say Western, and
Mm-hmm.
people who live in more authoritarian countries, we would more usually say Eastern. It actually found that people who live in authoritarian nations experience a lower quality
Is
of
there any
life,
level?
but they actually experience higher satisfaction with their lives
Yeah.
than do the people who have a greater quality of life, but they don't actually match the people who are living in the authoritarian nations, and that's an interesting question. Well, why? One theory posits that well, it's maybe because they're dedicating themselves to this physical structure, this nation state, this hell, even this leader.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we could see it in we could definitely see it in places like cults, certain sects, religion, where people are able to find an immediate structure with which they can impact, and they will dedicate themselves to it. like for example, it's an interesting question. Like, if people can see like Jim Jones is spiking the Kool-Aid, why doesn't everyone just say fuck it, I'm leaving, I'm not drinking your bullshit ass Kool-Aid? Well, then ask the person, well, how easy is it for you to abandon your values when they're the things that give you meaning and comfort and structure? How easy is it?
Yeah.
Like if a person believes in what Destiny has to say, I'm going to ask that person, well, Destiny said this shitty thing. Go ahead, leave. Fuck the community, bail.
Right.
Well, no, and all of a sudden they're gonna start playing optics games. Well, if you actually look at it this way, and then you twist the Rubik's cube 90 degrees to the left, and then you take a kaleidoscope out, it actually isn't that bad. A person could rationalize these things really effectively when it's something that directly connects to them.
Yeah, and I think the people in chat are actually kind of vibing with what you said. For instance, Jim Jones's church has a more negative quality of life, but a greater sense of meaning confirmed. Is like you can make it a joke or a meme, but at the same time, like those people, you can have all these positive associated mental outcomes from subsuming yourself to the collective and finding a moral structure. But just because you're individually experiencing those benefits doesn't mean that you're not doing horrific shit. And so the actual goal is to try to not only strike the balance, but also like try to align it with your morality.
Well, yeah, exactly. And well, sometimes it's your morality, sometimes it's the morality that was granted to you. And all in all, these very things are still done, perhaps because a person's trying to escape that subconscious fear of their own mortality, the mortality sapiens, or whatever the correct wording of it is, where some people themselves believe that they could escape the inevitability of their death because well, this leader has the answers. They have the answers. They can help me. Like what was that one called? Called Heaven's Gate. The
Yep.
guys who went got those fresh ass Nikes, got in their jumpsuits, shaved their heads, and then all committed suicide. Yeah, they believed that they were going to escape that mortality, that they were going to do something greater, something with more meaning than what they currently had. And it is perhaps an unfortunate reality that perhaps these people had very little meaning, that they were potentially depressed, which kind of pushed them to it.
I was actually going to say, if anything, you've kind of highlighted the danger with approaching the world with nihilism and then having a like. So if you start from nihilism, but then there's all these psychological benefits to collectivism or religion, and then you're just looking for purpose, so you just throw your lot in with anything that'll give you a benefit, and you don't necessarily care about like the morality because you're too lazy to create your own framework and evaluate morality for yourself. Then that's where you get these dangerous offshoots like suicide death cults and all that kind of stuff, because basically you didn't want to do the work your fucking self.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't want to do the work themselves, but oh, look, glorious leaders giving me the pats on the head. This makes me feel nice and warm and toasty and special inside.
So let's drink some
And
Kool-Aid.
yeah,
Go
let's drink
go
some
see the
fucking
star
Kool-Aid.
gods.
And a lot of this is reasoning as to why people are willing to do some extreme shit when they're pushed to it, because they've subsumed their existence, their morality, to a leader or a group of leaders, people who give them everything they want to hear, but with no promise of actually following it up. They just packaged and sold it really well. Whereas a person who has to actually sit down and put in the work, yeah, it's shitty work. It's incredibly shitty work. You're gonna sit there some days thinking like, what the fuck am I doing in my life? Like, what the fuck am I actually doing?
I'm promoting the Pan American Empire and invading down to Panama and Jordan Peterson psychology and mixed economy capitalism, and I'm trying to be a niche micro internet celebrity.
I agree with most of that except the current Jordan Peterson. I think that guy needs
No,
to
he
take
needs to eat
a.
a fucking vegetable, bud. It's very clear that he hasn't had the fucking essential vitamins and nutrients from fucking broccoli in a really long time.
It seems like he hasn't had the beneficial like the benefits of a good hug yet.
Yeah. And like I'm sure his family actually does hug him, but I think he needs like a big sad bro crying hug, you know? Like he just needs somebody to hold him while he just like like
Yeah, just screams into your shoulder,
yeah,
gets his tears all over your
that's what
shirt.
we need. Actually from Fight Club with where there's Bob, the guy who took testosterone for too long, so he developed boobs, and like he just like the fucking main character just sits there and cries into his boobs. So yeah, that's what we need.
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, that is honestly what I had to bring to you. How all these things kind of have a knock-on effect on each other. It's all like a web. It's linked.
No, it's beautiful. It's beautifully said. I love it. And also, I was kind of worried when we first broached the topic. I was like, "Oh man, this is gonna be depressing as fuck." But then, what I realized, what we were doing about halfway through, it's like, yeah, we're talking about nihilism and depression and death avoidance and all that kind of stuff. But what we're really talking about is how do you live a good life? And I think that's an important topic that we need to broach a little bit more often, particularly for the younger crowd.
Yeah, exactly. If you have the meaning within your life, honestly, you could go pretty long time without ever worrying about death
Right.
because every day is a day worth living.
Yes. All right, brother. Then I'm gonna go check on my German friend who is up on Ukraine. We're gonna get caught up on Ukraine, and then honestly, we're probably gonna call it a night because I'm old as fuck and my bones hurt. But it was beautiful to hang out with you, and it was super fun. So let's do it again sometime.
Absolutely. I can't wait for the Ukraine section.
All right, catch you, buddy.
Have a good one.